So much has happened in the last week in the Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow saga. Can you share with us what has happened?
Well, this has indeed been an extraordinary week. We can admit some, the investigation had after the arrest of Lori Vallow, we all knew there was another shoe to drop, but it seemed to have gone quiet for a period of time. And everybody stood down and just waited for something to happen. And then the other day, there was a text message that went out to a friend of ours who's been working with us, saying that there were 15 or 20 police officers in front of Chad's house. And one thing led to another. The dig was in the backyard. And at that point, we knew it was going to be pretty bad, and it was.
Now, you have followed this case since its inception.
Yep.
And you went through all the trials and tribulations of the search for these two children. And in the last week, we found that they are not alive. Was this inevitable for you? Did you know that this was probably going to be the result?
Yeah, and I think the authorities probably knew from they didn't know absolutely, but it seemed pretty apparent they were not alive. From that very first visit they made to Lori Vallow's house at the instigation of JJ's grandparents. It was right after Thanksgiving. And they came around and wondered where he was, and then they disappeared the next day and wouldn't cooperate with the police. And it was pretty clear to them he was no longer among the living, and Tylee had vanished even earlier. So
just tragic.
Yeah.
So you sat down with Lori's best friend, who really hadn't spoken at all for the last 5 or so months. But her name is Melanie Gibbs, and she had a lot to say. What was some of the more interesting things that she shared with you?
The reason Melanie is so interesting, and there are two Melanies in this story, Melanie Gibb had been a casual friend of Lori's, but not for a long time. They met in 2018 at a quasi-religious event in Melanie's church. And they went to a conference at which Melanie introduced Lori to Chad. And that's when things began to happen. But that was toward the end of 2018. All of this occurred in the course of a year, where a tragic romance happened with all kinds of pretty strange and out there religious ideas underpinning it. The notion that they were somehow godlike figures, that they were translated beings, that they had lived many lives, that those lives went back thousands of years on many planets, and they had been married before many times. The story is that Lori embraced Melanie heard firsthand. She was there. And I get don't get the impression she confesses. She believed all that stuff until, one terrible day.
There seemed to be a belief when Melanie was talking to you, there was sort of a turning point for her when she said, my gosh, this Chad Daybell is deceptive. And he is almost like a cult leader. And Lori has believed it, as we all did. And he has encouraged her to do these sinister things. Does she share that with you?
Indeed. It was that day. It was the day the grandparents phoned the police. Please do a check to see where JJ is. The police, next day actually, went to Lori's townhouse, discovered JJ was missing, didn't get the right kind of answers from Lori about what may have happened. Then the two of them disappeared. But before they went off to Hawaii, they made a telephone call to Melanie and asked Melanie to give them an alibi. And the story that she will tell on our program on Monday night is pretty remarkable what they wanted her to do. But at that point, she realized she had been led down the garden path, she'd been lied to, these people had done something terrible to those children, and she knew she needed to do something about it. So it was she who began to cooperate with the police.
And so from that point on, when she had made police contact, from that point on, is it fair to say she's been cooperating with the authorities?
Indeed, without Melanie Gibb, who knows? As you know well, in every significant case, there are moments when it could have gone either way. If the grandparents hadn't made that call, none of us may have heard anything about this. Life might have gone on, explanations would have been accepted. If Melanie Gibb hadn't called the police that day to add her story, who knows what they may have discovered. So the story she tells is absolutely riveting. I was happy to hear it and happy to share what I counted on Monday night.
Did she talk to you at all about her willingness down the line to testify against the two of them if this comes to that?
Oh, she knows she'll be testifying, and she expects she'll be testifying probably multiple times. She's prepared for that. I think she's quite nervous about it. But you have to remember, this is not just a story about Lori and Chad. There are other characters in this story, quite a few. And each of them may or may not have had a role to play. So the investigation, in my understanding, is far from over. Now that both Lori and Chad are in jail on $1 million bail each and aren't expected to be getting out anytime soon, they are going to take their time, I think. And how far will the investigation go? How many people will it involve? It's really hard to say at this stage, but expectations are more people will be brought in.
So it is your understanding that the police are actively investigating the death of Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy?
Yes, indeed. The police department in Rexburg, the sheriff's department in Rexburg, the police department in Gilbert, Arizona, the FBI, there are quite a number of police forces that are actively investigating this case.
Melanie Gibb wrote a 7-page open letter, which has some sort of bizarre rants about spiritual beliefs, but it also says some fairly incriminating things as to the actions of Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow. What are your thoughts of that writing?
Well, I just like to hear what people's stories are. The letter and the story Melanie told us are certainly in sync. And they are bizarre suggestions. They are bizarre theologies that underpin all of this material. They are not alone. And Melanie embraced these ideas herself. And so did quite a few of their friends, numbers of them. And so did several of Lori's close relatives. It was a group of people, all of whom had embraced some very strange ideas that had been promulgated by Chad. And that's what started the whole thing going through. The notion that somehow somebody was speaking with authority. The old Bible saying that the scribes in Jerusalem couldn't believe that Jesus was speaking with authority. That's where that phrase comes from. And that's the attribution that was made for what Charles was saying.
And that's an interesting point, because you in your very long and wonderful career have covered a lot of cult.
Certainly.
No, but I mean, and really terrific career where you've covered cult-like cases. I mean, you've covered cases where there is somebody that people see as a prophet and they follow them blindly. And is this that kind of a case, or is it more sinister than that?
Well, I think it's more sinister. It does have, it certainly, on the outside envelope are these bizarre religious beliefs and people who felt led by them. There are fringes of the fringes of the LDS Church. I know that the Central Church Authority is worried about them, doesn't quite necessarily know what to do about them. I'm speaking out of turn here. I don't really know what their attitude is, but so there are significant numbers of people who hold such religious beliefs and trade them back and forth and have conferences about them and have podcasts about them. But was that the real reason this happened, or was it simply that there was that it was a tragic love affair, that they just absolutely wanted to be together, no matter what the cost, and the cost would include the deaths of several people?
Why are we all so fascinated about this case? What is it?
I don't know, but there are deep, deep connections between human beings, their various spiritual beliefs, their temptations to breach social mores where it comes to relationships. The power of sexual attraction, the power of money, the power of all of those, 7 deadly sins that lead us astray. They're very, very old ideas, and they still roil us every day, every year. More stories come out which are really out of the same damn playbook that they had in 2000.
Do you think there'll ever come a time, because Lori and Chad really have been so tight-lipped about everything, but do you ever think there'll come a time where the two of them or either of them will tell law enforcement what actually happened to all these people in their family?
I don't know. But what they'll do, I kind of doubt it, though. From everything we've seen so far, it would suggest that that won't happen. And you have to factor into this story also that there is a certain amount of mistrust of authorities, of police, of the courts, of the government that exists in some of these areas where these ideas are prevalent. I'm not saying it's good or bad; it just is. There's a lot of suspicion of authority, and therefore less likelihood, I think, that people are going to believe that if they tell their story, they tell the truth, that it's going to be handled correctly.
Right. And it's almost like it's gone so far at this point that they've lied so often to so many people. Will they ever really come clean? The answer is probably not.
Yeah.
What else will we learn from this Dateline special? What will be the major takeaway from this Dateline special?
We have been reporting details of this story for months now, and following these people around and trying to figure out what they were all about, where all this came from, what their beliefs and ideas were, and how it connected. And there are a lot of other people who are connected in some ways to the story that we'll deal with in future Dateline episodes. But the central issue that we wanted to somehow resolve, and I think that we're going to be able to get there on Monday night, is kind of the core story. Why did it happen? What got it started? What was the catalyst? How did it all come apart? And you get it after watching that.
Will it provide any closure for all of the people that are watching that have their heart has been broken, that these children, that you learn that these children are no longer with us? Is there any glimmer of hope that we can take from it?
Well, at least it appears that they have stopped whatever is happening, and that won't be happening again. But I don't want to sound like a pessimist, but that word closure is not one that I embrace very much, because people don't get closure. They hear about something happening, and either it affects them or it doesn't. If it doesn't affect them, they look on like they either do or don't take a lesson from it. But for those who are personally affected, and we'll see those who are closely related to those children, you see the way they're personally affected, and there's no